Her mother sold her to a vampire lord, then he realized she feared every soul she met. The marble halls of Thornwick Manor echoed with the sound of footsteps, confident ones belonging to Lord Damien, the ancient vampire who'd ruled these lands for 3 centuries. His shadow stretched across the walls like living darkness, and the servants scattered at his approach like frightened birds. He wasn't expecting a visitor tonight. The woman standing in his study wore desperation like a second skin. Her clothes were modest but fraying at the edges, her hands trembling as she clutched a small leather purse. She was human, obviously, and clearly terrified. Most humans were when they found themselves in the presence of a creature that could drain them dry in seconds. "You came alone?" Damien asked, his voice carrying the weight of centuries. It wasn't really a question. "Yes, my lord," the woman whispered. Her name was Margaret, though Damien didn't bother asking. "I've come because I have something you want." Damien leaned back in his chair, a smile playing at the corners of his mouth. In 300 years he'd heard every proposition, every bargain, every desperate plea. This one reeked of debt. He could smell it on her, the acrid scent of financial ruin, the metallic taste of hunger in the air around her. "Do you now?" he said, gesturing for her to continue. "Speak." Margaret's jaw trembled. "My daughter, I'm here to offer you my daughter." The world seemed to pause, even the candlelight flickered uncertainly. Damien had expected many things: money, blood contracts, sexual favors, even her own servitude. But this was different. This was primal. This was the kind of desperation that made even ancient creatures sit up and pay attention. "Go on," he urged, genuinely intrigued now. "She's 23, healthy, untouched. I've kept her away from the world, kept her pure." Margaret's voice cracked. "She's worth something, isn't she? She's worth more than what I owe you." Damien knew exactly what Margaret owed him. 3 years of unpaid debt from her late husband's gambling addiction. The interest had accumulated until it was impossible to pay. He'd been patient, cruelly patient, as only an immortal creature could be. He'd been expecting her to sell her house, her jewelry, her dignity, not her daughter. "What's her name?" Damien asked. "Violet." Something about the name struck him. Violet, a flower that bloomed in shadow, how fitting. "Bring her," Damien commanded. "1 week, bring her here and we'll consider your debt. Resolved." Margaret's relief was palpable. She nearly collapsed into tears, mumbling her gratitude, backing toward the door. Damien watched her go with the detachment of someone who'd learned long ago that human emotions were as temporary as mayflies. He poured himself a glass of blood wine and settled into his thoughts. A daughter, how interesting, how utterly, deliciously interesting. What he didn't expect, what nobody could have expected, was what Violet would be. 7 days later, the manor's entrance was thrown open. 2 figures stood silhouetted against the dying afternoon sun. Margaret entered first, and behind her came a figure wrapped so thoroughly in dark fabric that Damien could barely see her face. The girl was clearly being hidden. "She's here," Margaret announced, her voice steadier now that the transaction was nearly complete. "As promised." Damien descended the grand staircase with deliberate slowness. With each step, he expected the girl to look up, to meet his eyes, to demonstrate the usual human reaction to his presence, fear mixed with a strange magnetism that his kind exuded. It was in his nature to draw humans toward him, the way a flame draws moths. But as his feet touched the marble floor of the entrance hall, he noticed something odd. Violet kept her head down. More than that, she turned away. Her entire body had gone rigid, trembling visibly, and she wrapped her arms around herself as if trying to make herself smaller. "Violet," Margaret said, her tone carrying an edge of warning, "look at Lord Damien, show respect." Violet shook her head, a small, desperate movement. Damien frowned. In 300 years he'd never encountered defiance. Fear, yes, lust constantly, respect, obviously, but this was something else. This was visceral, uncontrollable terror. "Leave us," he commanded Margaret. The mother didn't hesitate. She practically fled the manor, the debt lifted from her shoulders like a physical weight. Damien could hear her carriage rattling away down the long drive, and then there was silence. Just him and the terrified girl in the dark dress. "Look at me," Damien said, keeping his voice level. He wasn't unused to giving commands. every creature in his domain obeyed without question. Violet's breathing became faster, more panicked. Her hands clenched into fists so tight her nails drew blood from her palms. "I can't," she gasped. I can't." Damien found himself genuinely curious now. He moved closer, slowly, carefully, as if approaching a wounded animal. "What's your name? Your real name, not just what your mother called you." Violet," her voice was barely a whisper. "Violet," he repeated, "I'm not going to hurt you." "You're going to," she said, her voice breaking. "Everyone does, everyone always does, that's all they ever do." Something in those words struck him as being more than just the paranoia of a terrified girl. There was a weight to them, a history. Damien had lived long enough to recognize trauma when he encountered it. "What if I promised you that I wouldn't?" he asked, genuinely curious now. "What if I told you that you're safe here?" Violet let out a sound that was half laugh, half sob. "No one's safe, I'm not safe, I've never been safe. Everyone who gets close to me, something happens, something terrible." Damien raised an eyebrow. "What happens?" "They get hurt or they get sick. Or," she trailed off, shaking her head violently, "I'm cursed, my mother said so, that's why she had to give me away. That's why no one would want me, that's why I was kept locked in the house." The pieces were beginning to form a picture, and it was not the picture Damien had expected. The merchant's daughter wasn't just shy or modest, she was genuinely isolated, genuinely terrified of human contact. And apparently, she believed herself to be cursed. Damien had encountered 1,000 kinds of human fragility. He'd seduced them, broken them, enslaved them. But this was something different. This was a creature so broken by isolation and fear that she couldn't even look at another being without terror overwhelming her. It was, he discovered with some surprise, fascinating. "I'm not everyone," he said quietly. "I'm not humans." "That's worse," Violet whimpered. "You're a monster. My mother said you were a monster." And instead of contradicting her, Damien smiled. Because in that moment he realized something truly interesting. He was the only being who could possibly help her. A human would have contaminated her further, fed her fear. But a vampire, a creature already dead, already beyond the reach of her supposed curse. Perhaps, just perhaps, there was a way forward here that neither of them had anticipated. "You will stay in the East Wing," he commanded. "You will have servants attend to your needs. And Violet, you will eat, you will rest. And eventually you will learn that fear is sometimes a cage we build for ourselves." For the first time, Violet looked up. Just barely. Just enough for him to see her eyes, wide, haunted, but also desperate for something that might have been hope. It was a dangerous game he was beginning to play. But then again, Damien had always enjoyed games. 3 months passed. The servants at Thornwick Manor had never encountered a guest quite like Violet. She stayed in her rooms, taking meals through a slot in the door. She woke in the night, crying out from nightmares that plagued her with the consistency of a curse itself. But slowly, incrementally, something began to shift. Damien found himself visiting her chambers more and more frequently. Not for the reasons his ancient heart might have once demanded, but out of genuine curiosity about this broken creature who'd been left in his care. He would stand outside her door and speak to her through the wood, and gradually, so gradually that neither of them quite noticed when it happened, she began to speak back. He learned her history in fragments. A father who disappeared when she was young. A mother who'd grown increasingly unstable, increasingly convinced that Violet was responsible for every misfortune that befell the family. Other children at the village school who'd gotten sick after playing with her. A plague that had swept through town when Violet was 15, one that she was convinced she'd caused. "They said I was poison," she told him one evening, her voice steady enough now that she could speak to him without shaking. "They said everything I touched died, so my mother locked me away, locked me in my room for years, fed me through the door like I was a monster, and maybe I am, maybe I should just accept it." Damien sat on a chair outside her door, a glass of blood wine in one hand. "Do you kill things now? With your curse, I mean." "No," Violet admitted. "I haven't been around anyone long enough to find out, but with you, you're immortal, you can't be hurt by me, that's why my mother sold me to you. She wanted me to be trapped where I couldn't hurt anyone else." "Is that what you think of this place, as a trap?" There was a long silence. No, Violet finally said, and he heard genuine surprise in her voice. I don't think I do anymore. It was progress. Damien found himself pleased by this, which was odd. He didn't experience pleasure easily anymore. Most things had become numb to him over the centuries. But this, watching this shattered girl slowly begin to trust him, this was something. The problem, of course, was that he was beginning to break his own rules. He'd commanded that she remain isolated. That seemed wise. After all, if her trauma stemmed from contact with humans, why expose her to more? But he was increasingly frustrated by the barrier of her locked door. He wanted to see her face, wanted to watch her expressions as she spoke, wanted to understand the mechanics of this curse she claimed to carry. Come out, he commanded one evening. Just to the hallway, I want to see you. The panic on the other side of the door was audible. He could hear her breathing quicken, her voice rising to a frightened pitch. No, I can't. If I come out, if you see me, something will happen. Something always happens when people really see me. I'm not people, Damien reminded her, and I'm the one giving the orders here. Come out, Violet, now. It was the voice of command that had kept kingdoms in line, that had bent wills and broken spirits. Violet fought it. He could feel her resistance, that same strange internal magic that kept her locked away, but eventually the ancient authority in his tone won out. The door opened, and Damien saw her fully for the first time. She was small, almost fragile, with dark hair that hung limp around shoulders that curved inward defensively. Her dress was simple, pale green, and hung on her frame as if it didn't quite know how to fit. But her eyes were the most extraordinary thing he'd ever seen. They were the colour of storm clouds, with depths that seemed to shift when the light hit them, and they were filled with such profound sadness that for a moment even his ancient heart stumbled. She stood in the hallway as far from him as possible, her back pressed against the opposite wall. What do you want? She whispered. Damien stood and he watched as she flinched away. I want you to stop being afraid of me. I can't, Violet said. You don't understand. When I'm afraid, that's when it happens. That's when people get hurt. My fear is... She stopped abruptly. Her hand went to her throat and her eyes went wide. What's wrong? Damien asked, moving toward her. Don't, she gasped, but it was too late. He was close enough now to see what she saw. There was a mark on her neck. A dark mark, almost like a bruise, but it was shaped like fingers, like hands, multiple hands arranged in a pattern that shouldn't have been possible. Damien's entire body went still. What is that? I told you, Violet whispered, and now she was crying, tears streaming down her face. I told you something bad always happens. It's already started. Can't you feel it? Can't you feel the sickness? And then Damien understood. His servants had started getting sick 3 days ago, a mysterious illness that the local physicians couldn't diagnose. 2 had already died, and the rest were bedridden with fever. They'd blamed it on contaminated water or a curse from the forest. But looking at those marks on Violet's neck, at the terror in her eyes, at the way her fear seemed to be literally manifesting as physical marks on her skin, Damien realized something that shook him to his core. You didn't do it, he said slowly, the pieces clicking together. Did you? Violet shook her head violently. Then who? The answer came not from Violet, but from the shadows at the end of the hallway. A figure emerged from the darkness. She was tall, elegant, and achingly familiar. Margaret, but not the desperate, frightened Margaret from 3 months ago. This Margaret moved with purpose and power, and her eyes held the gleam of something that was decidedly not human. Hello, daughter, Margaret said, her voice smooth as silk and twice as dangerous. Did you really think I was human? Did you really think I didn't know what you are? Violet made a sound of utter betrayal, but Damien was already moving. He stepped in front of the girl instinctively, and for the first time in 300 years, he felt something that he could only describe as righteous fury. What have you done? He demanded. Margaret smiled, and her fangs were exposed, older fangs than his from a bloodline even more ancient. I've been waiting 3 years for this opportunity. You see, dear Damien, my daughter isn't cursed. She's something far more valuable than that. She raised her hand, and the shadows of the hallway seemed to deepen, to coalesce, to become almost solid. She's the key to the grimoire of Aldrich, and you, my old friend, are going to help me use her to unlock it. the grimoire of Aldrich. The name alone carried weight in the vampire world, the way nuclear weapons carry weight in human affairs. A book of such power that it had been locked away, scattered across dimensions, its pieces hidden where no single creature could ever access them. The legend claimed that whoever gathered all the pieces would have the power to reshape reality itself, to undo the curse that bound vampires to darkness, or to deepen it into eternal slavery, depending on what they wished. For 300 years, Damien had heard whispers of beings seeking it. He'd never believed anyone would actually succeed. "She's not the key," Margaret continued, stepping closer. Her face had shifted into something ancient and terrible, something that predated human beauty by millennia. "She is the lock. Her bloodline, her fear, her isolation, all of it was cultivated. All of it was planned. She's the conduit, and when her fear reaches its apex, when it manifests fully, it will open doorways that have been sealed since the world was young." Violet was shaking so badly she could barely stand. "Mother," she gasped. "What are you saying? Why would you do this? Why would you lock me away if—" "To keep you pure," Margaret said, and there was something almost affectionate in her tone. "To keep your power focused inward, to ensure that when the moment came, you would have enough terror accumulated to tear the veil between worlds. I am one of the 7 keepers, Violet. We have waited ages for this, and you, my darling daughter, are the instrument of our resurrection." Damien's mind was racing. He'd been played. They all had. This wasn't about debt collection or servitude. This was about positioning a weapon in his house under his care where he would naturally protect her, and where that protection would be meaningless against the tide coming toward them. "You won't succeed," he said to Margaret, though he wasn't entirely sure it was true. "I won't let you." "You," Margaret laughed, a sound like breaking glass. "You're just a house cat thinking you're a lion. I've watched empires rise and fall while you were still learning how to hunt. This thing you've become, this noble protector, it won't save her. It won't save any of us." She raised her hand, and the air around them began to crystallize with dark energy. The walls of the manor started to crack, and through those cracks poured something that looked like smoke but felt like screaming. Damien grabbed Violet's hand, pulling her back, preparing to run to find somewhere defensible, but her grip was slack, her eyes distant. "It's okay," Violet said, her voice oddly calm. "I understand now." "No," Damien commanded. "You don't, we're leaving." "I understand what she couldn't break," Violet interrupted. Her eyes snapped up to meet his, and in them was something that hadn't been there before. Not hope exactly, but clarity. "I understand what she made me into, and I understand that she made me into it because she was afraid of it, because some part of her knew that my fear, my real fear, isn't a weakness. It's a weapon she can never control." Margaret's expression shifted. "What are you?" "Every person who got sick," Violet continued, speaking to her mother but not looking away from Damien. "Every person who died, that wasn't me, that was you. You were feeding your power through me, through my isolation, through my terror. You were using my fear as a conduit." Understanding bloomed in Damien's mind, and it was terrible and beautiful. "She can feel it," he whispered. "Your connection to her, she can feel every use of her power." Violet nodded. "I thought I was cursed because people got hurt around me, but they got hurt because you were hurting them, using me to do it, and I never realized. I never understood that you couldn't hide that from me, not forever, not when I finally stopped being afraid of you and started being afraid of myself." Margaret hissed, and the shadows around her grew darker, more concentrated. "I gave you life, I fed you, I kept you safe." "You imprisoned me," Violet said, and her voice was steady now, strong in a way it had never been. "You made me believe I was a monster so you could use my despair like a tool, but here's the thing you never considered." She stood up straight, and as she did, something changed in the hallway. The shadows that Margaret had summoned began to dissipate, drawing back as if from a flame. "I'm not afraid anymore," Violet said simply. It was a small statement, barely more than a whisper, but it carried the weight of 3 years of isolation, months of slow healing, and a moment of crystalline understanding. Her fear, the thing that Margaret had cultivated so carefully, had served its purpose. It had accumulated until it became so familiar, so much a part of her that she could finally see it for what it was, not a curse but a chain that she could set down. Margaret screamed, and the sound was the scream of a creature losing access to an essential part of its power. The dark energy that she'd been channeling through Violet cut off abruptly, leaving her exposed, vulnerable, diminished. For the first time, Damien saw the ancient vampire's true weakness. It wasn't age or power. It was the fact that she'd built her entire existence on Violet's suffering, and without it she had nothing. "Take her," Margaret commanded, her voice now harsh and desperate. "Take the girl and use her yourself. That's the only way any of this makes sense." "No," Damien said, and he meant it, because somewhere in the last 3 months something had shifted in him too, something that had been dormant for centuries, the capacity to protect something not because it served his interests but because it mattered. He stepped forward and Margaret actually backed away. Ancient vampire, old beyond reckoning, and she was backed away from a creature whose only weapon was conviction. The shadows in the manor collapsed entirely. Margaret made a sound of rage and despair, and before Damien could move to stop her, she dissolved into the shadows herself, retreating to whatever dark corner of the world spawned creatures like her. Then there was silence. Violet swayed on her feet and Damien caught her before she fell. She was crying, but they were different tears now, not tears of fear but of release. "What happens now?" she asked, her voice small but no longer terrified. Damien held her carefully, as if she were made of spun glass. "Now you heal, you eat, you sleep, you live. In the manor." He paused, considering. "Wherever you wish, but if you want to stay, I think I would like that." Violet looked up at him, and for the first time she met his eyes without flinching. They stood in the hallway of Thornwick Manor, surrounded by the fading echoes of darkness, and something between them shifted into something new. Not love, not yet, maybe not ever, but something equally powerful, the recognition that they had both been broken and that perhaps they could help each other heal. The manor had changed. The servants had returned, though they whispered about the ghost of the keeper, and the way the young lady had cleansed the halls. Violet no longer locked herself away, though she never ventured into crowds. Instead, she cultivated a garden on the manor's grounds, flowers that grew in shadow, that thrived in darkness, that bloomed in the quiet places where sunlight rarely touched. Damien would often find her there, kneeling in the soil, talking to her plants as if they were old friends. She was learning slowly that her presence didn't poison things, that touch didn't automatically bring death, that the world was more varied, more nuanced, more forgiving than the terror in her head had convinced her it was. One evening, as the sun set and the manor began to wake for the night, Violet came inside with dirt under her fingernails and a small smile on her face. "I found something today," she said, showing him a seedling. "I don't know what it is. It was just growing wild in the corner of the garden, but it's beautiful. It might bloom into something extraordinary." Damien looked at the seedling, then at the girl holding it, and he thought about all the things that grew in darkness, all the things that bloomed when given the right conditions and a little care. "Yes," he said quietly, "I think it will." And in the depths of the manor, in the places where shadows still lingered, something that had once been Margaret watched from the dark spaces between worlds, unable to touch, unable to influence, trapped by the loss of her greatest weapon. Violet, the girl who'd been sold to a vampire lord, had learned the most important lesson of all. That fear is only as powerful as the power we give it, and that sometimes the greatest escape requires nothing more than choosing to be afraid no longer. If you've ever felt imprisoned by your own fears, remember Violet's truth. The chains that bind us are often ones we're the only ones who can unlock. Want the extended, darker ending? Join the Vampire Inner Circle. The full extended version is available on Patreon. Continue on Patreon, link in description.